Well, thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm sorry I can't actually be there in person because I'll be in the United States at the time. Now, Nina asked me if I would do the keynote address on well-being in the workplace, which has become a very popular topic now throughout the developed world. Much so even now that many companies, public sector bodies have non-executive directors who are responsible for employee health and well-being. That's still a small number, but there are directors of health and well-being now at the senior leadership team in many organizations in the public sector and in the private sector, and indeed in the third sector. Why is this an important topic? I'll give you the figures. What I'll do is I'll go through, give you why mental well-being at work has now become so a significant topic. Then I'll talk to you about what causes people not to be well at work. Then I'll talk about what we have to do about it. So let's start at the beginning. Can you do the next slide, please? So if you take a look at this, you'll see, I'm just giving you an indication that it looks like a complicated slide, but this is the year before the pandemic hit. The Health and Safety Commission, this gives you a flavor of it by looking at the UK, because I have all the data on that, but this is in most developed countries now. If you take a look at this was a year before the pandemic hit. The Health and Safety Executive found that 57% of all long-term sickness absence in the UK economy was due to stress, depression, and anxiety. And whereas 20 years ago, it used to be musculoskeletal diseases was the leading cause, they're only 25% now. Big problem. In almost all the developed world, between 50 and 60% of all long-term sickness absence is for what we call the common mental disorders of stress, anxiety, and depression. Next slide, please. Now, this is an interesting slide. It goes back a way to 2007, around the time when we had the financial crisis, the global financial crisis. What had ended up happening then was that quite a lot of people during the financial crisis were made redundant, lost their jobs, huge numbers, particularly in the UK, something but like between 30 and 40% of people in the finance sector and a range of sectors lost their job. It was a devastating recession. It was more like a depression than a recession. And that went on from about 2007-8 all the way to 2015. But what was interesting is the economists at the Sainsbury Center of Mental Health in the UK in that time were looking at absenteeism, the cost to the UK economy, and compared it to presenteeism, because so many people were losing their job that many people did not want to take off ill, even if they were ill. So what they would do is go to work ill with something wrong with them, so they wouldn't have a high absenteeism record on their HR records. So what they found was presenteeism was actually double in that year, 2007-8. That presenteeism was 15 billion, whereas absenteeism was only 8 billion cost to the economy. And so that's when the topic of presenteeism began, and people began to look at this as a topic area. How do we measure it? What's the cost of it? This in effect, it means people going to work either ill, job dissatisfied, or just feeling low or whatever, but contributing no added value. So they're going to work and showing face time, but they're not contributing added value to the productivity or their performance and so on. And the next slide shows you something about what we decided to look at in terms of presenteeism in the workplace. Next slide, please. If you see this, you'll see that when we look at the issue of presenteeism, there are 4 different quadrants. The first one's the top left. We want people in the workplace to be healthy and to be present. That's what all of us want. As many as we can get in there, the better. Then there's the one to the right is no absences. I'm sorry, health is not good, but people are still coming to work. And that's sickness presenteeism. That's the fear of it of it showing on their HR record and it adversely affecting them if organizations do a downside. Now, presenteeism tends to occur a lot during recessions or difficult times, like what we're going through now, through the pandemic, through the global crisis that we have, economic crisis with energy, cost of living crisis globally. We're going to see presenteeism at very, very high levels now. Now, the third quadrant, the bottom left, somebody's healthy and not always present. That's job dissatisfaction. I'm fine. I'm not ill, but I hate my job. And then there's unhealthy and not always present. And that's people who are mainly stressed. I'm not well, and I'm not present. Sometimes I'm present, sometimes I'm not. Now, here's interesting. I decided to do a study of 39,000 people in the UK, a representative sample throughout all sectors, to see, and we measure presenteeism. We have a tool to do that, a psychometric tool. And I wanted to see what proportion of people fell into each category. Next slide, please. And you'll be surprised to see, because the area that we really need people in is no absences and healthy, right? And only 35% of my sample of 39,000 employees were in that area. And that is really bad news. If a third of people are really productive, feeling well, that is a concern. 28% were regularly turning up to work ill because they were worried about their long-term future, their job security. So they wanted to show FaceTime, even though they should have stayed at home and got over illness, whatever illness they had. 13% were job dissatisfied and showing absences, but not because they were ill, but just because they just didn't like their job. And 24% were suffering from stress at work. They had some absences, but the health was not good. So presenteeism has become quite a big issue to measure. Many organizations are now measuring it. And the evidence is the more people do the presenteeism, actually, strangely enough, they think they're making themselves invulnerable to job loss, but they're actually making themselves iller and therefore are more vulnerable to job loss. So it's a real problem area for us. So in other words, basically, next slide, please. I'll show you the summary of some of the evidence. If you look at the evidence on why mental well-being has become a big issue in the workplace, OECD measures it on a regular basis. If you look at just the UK, they lose 4.5% of their GDP every year because of mental health at work. The cost per employee of mental health is about £1,000 per employee. The Office of National Statistics means we lose 15 million sick days per year. It goes on and on. The evidence is overwhelming. It's not just in the UK, it's every developed and developing country has the same problem. It used to be musculoskeletal that was a problem, but now it's the way we manage people. It's the quality of working life. It is a really organizational culture issue, which we have to address and cope with. It's no longer good enough to have well-being days where you get sushi at your desk, bean bags, ping pong tables, and mindfulness at lunch. It goes way beyond that. It's about changing the nature of the organization to give people more autonomy and control over their job and other things, which we're going to talk about right now. Next slide, please. So we know, and most people working in organizational health psychology know, that we already know what the main causes of stress are. Next slide, please. And they are these factors. The factors on the left here, sources of stress at work. These are the things that cause people to get ill at work. Certain factors related to your particular job, the role you play in your organization, your relationships at work, your career development or lack thereof, the organization's structure and climate, and finally, the link between home and work, what we call the home-work interface. These factors, evidence shows globally, affect the individual and ultimately the symptoms of stress, which we can see here, their individual symptoms and their organizational symptoms. as an organizational psychologist, when I'm called into a global company or a public sector body or a professional body, it's usually the box at the bottom. High absenteeism. We're getting more on presenteeism, high labor turnover, accidents, poor quality control, a whole range of factors that hit the bottom line of organizations. So they get worried about it. Or in some cases, litigation, where employees are suing their employer for stress at work and winning big sums of money. So employers have to do something about it. So this model just says if we don't deal with the problems on the left, we end up with problems on the right. And the problems on the right are health-related problems or other problems that are organizational, apathy, prolonged strike, severe accidents, that kind of thing. So what we have to do in this space, what organizations have to do is think differently. And what by thinking different means you have to create a different kind of culture. Because 20 years ago, many of these problems still existed, but people tolerated them to pay their mortgage. But this generation of millennials and the Z generation won't do it. They won't stay with an organization that they say is dysfunctional, that doesn't value them, trust them, give them some autonomy at work and the like. And so it's become imperative now. As one HR director told me, I said, he was an HR director of a major global company in the finance sector. I said, you have done nothing in the well-being space for years. Why all of a sudden you're doing it now? And this was during the financial crisis. And he said to me, Cary, it's regrettable turnover. We have lost 30% of our staff during the recession, and we can't afford to lose anybody. Everybody, we're now mean and lean. Everybody counts. So we can't, so he was talking about labor turnover, talent management. How do we retain and attract the millennials and the Z generation? And you can't do it with a poor quality of working life. So let's take a look at some of the factors on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. So factors intrinsic to a job. Every job is different, but we know if you have unmanageable workloads, i.e. too much work, you're going to get ill. Tons of research that shows that. And that's if we had more, and we'll talk about the line manager in a minute, if we had more socially skilled and talented line managers, they should be aware of the fact that their direct reports, their subordinates have too much work on, so much work on, they're not able to cope with it all, and it makes them ill. But too little work, particularly in times of recession, particularly in times of what we're about to go into, because what we're going to see, I'm afraid, given the cost of energy, given the cost of living crisis, given the war in Ukraine, given all the things that are going on globally now, we're going to go into another recession. It probably won't be as bad, let's hope, than the financial crisis recession, but we're going to go into it. And we're going to see that if people feel they don't have much to do, i.e. too little work, that could be a source of stress. We know that that's a potential source of stress. There's a wonderful book by Joseph Heller, the man who wrote Catch-22. He wrote a book called Something's Happened, and it's about a man in an insurance company who had a stress breakdown. And it's a clever fictional account, but actually Heller worked in an insurance company before he started writing, before he became an acclaimed author. But I love this comment where he was talking about people who have underload. And one of his characters in the book said, which I love because it's a wonderful quote. This is somebody who didn't have enough to do. Say, I am bored with my work very often now. Everything routines that comes in, I pass along to somebody else. This makes my boredom worse. It's a real problem to decide whether it's more boring to do something boring than to pass along everything boring to somebody else and have nothing to do at all. It's humorous, but it's also quite telling. So underload can be a problem. Overload can be a problem. All of these can be a problem in a job. Every job is different. Every job has its own stress fingerprint. Next slide, please. I'll give you an example of a job where this gives you the stress fingerprint. I did some studies on air traffic controllers, which I published. These are the factors we found in air traffic controllers were causing them to have higher risk of coronary artery disease. We were able to collect biological information from air traffic controllers and then see what factors predicted their health. And here they were: variable workloads, high workloads, poor procedures by pilot, Air India flying in, speaking Hindi rather than speaking English, which is international language air traffic control, can create airline controller problems. But the main thing is their variable and high workloads, their shift hours. These are the kind of things that was causing them the most difficult and predicted their risk to coronary artery disease. So when you can identify in a job what the issues are, then you can think to yourself, how are we going to sort this out? How are we going to resolve it? And that's what you need to do if you're to look at jobs. The same thing applies if you're looking at a whole organization. Next slide, please. So workload is one factor. The second big factor is the role you play in your organization. How much autonomy and control do I have over my job? How ambiguous is my role? How much conflict does it have? How much responsibility does it have? This is a really important factor. And that's why, since the pandemic, in most developed countries now, service-based workers are now working flexible working and hybrid models. Why are they doing that? Because we realized it works. We have the technology. People can work partly from home, partly from a central office. They've been wanting to do that for a decade. That gives them more control and autonomy over their life and leads to work-life integration rather than people worried about their work-life balance. This is what we need more of. People who should be able to work more flexibly. Evidence is very clear. We've known that for 10 years, but for a long time, people didn't take flexible working, even if their employer offered it to them, because they were frightened it would adversely affect their careers. It would show they'd be less committed. Forget commitment. We want productivity, and work-life integration is the future for that. So role in the organization is very important. I like this, again, quote from Heller's book, Something's Happened. When one of his middle managers feels he has no control or autonomy at work, one of his characters in the book says, "What would happen if deliberately, calmly, with malice aforethought and obvious premeditation, I disobeyed?" I know what would happen. Nothing. Nothing would happen. And the knowledge depresses me. I suppose it's about impossible for someone like me to rebel anymore and produce any kind of lasting effect. I have lost the power at work to change things and to do things. So that is an illustration of it. Let me give you an idea of a role thing. Next slide gives you an idea of a study I did, which shows you where role stress is a problem. So in the next slide, you'll see, if we can get it up, we did studies of dentists. Dentists, by the way, in the West, tend to have real problems. They tend to be a group, would you believe, that has very high levels of stress. You'd think it would be more doctors than dentists, but dentists tend to be higher than even doctors. And it's mainly because they're trained technically. And when we did an audit for them, we did this studies in with the California Dental Association and with the British Dental Association, where we're looking at what is it that causes dentists to show high levels of burnout and things like that. And it's all about relationships, because they're technically trained, but they're not trained to manage difficult patients, to manage people in a practice, and to manage a whole thing, a set of relationships. That's what's causing them trouble. Not looking in people's mouth and standing up all day, but dealing with people, all the people they have to manage in their practice, dealing with patients who don't particularly know. Nobody wants to go to a dentist. We're trying to avoid the dentist like the plague. But when we go, that dentist is having to manage the pain fears and the worries that people have of going there, having to be a social animal. So what transpired from this research was dental schools began to do social skill training with dentists, how to manage relationships better. So it's important to look at what causes particular jobs problems. Third, next slide, please. Next slide is relationships being probably the most important factor in the workplace. And the most important factor in your job at work is your boss. And here's the problem we have in not just the developed world, the developing world, in every workplace in the world, we tend to promote people to managerial roles and recruit them to managerial roles based on their technical skills, not their people skills. We don't have parity in selecting people for promotion or to recruit them where there's parity between their people skills and their technical skills. What we need are line managers who have good EQ, emotional intelligence, who have good social interpersonal skills. Until we get that parity in a world where people are working hybridly, when mental health is a big issue and you have to be sensitive to people's behavior, we need more socially skilled line managers from shop floor all the way up to the top. We don't have them. Industry now knows they're important because during the pandemic, when we were locked down in many, many countries, the success of that organization was to some extent the line managers they had who had EQ and managed people's fears, contacted them on a regular basis because they were working primarily from home and so on. So that has changed the landscape now. And we in organizational psychology have to feature on the line manager. This is very fundamental now. And I think the good news is, see, I run something called the National Forum for Health and Wellbeing at Work out of Manchester Business School. It's made up of 42 global employers, Microsoft, BT, BP, Shell, Rolls-Royce, the BBC. It goes on and on and on, GSK, and so on. And what they have all said, it's made up of HR directors and chief medical officers, global chief medical officers of all these companies. And what they say is the most important thing for the health and well-being of employees is to have emotionally intelligent line managers. If you have that, you'll get rid of half the problems. You still will have another half of problems, but you'll get rid of those half the problems. And I think we have to understand the significance and the importance of this going forward. So that's really kind of critical. Next slide, please. Over promotion, under promotion. I think what we're going to have to worry about in the future over the next few years is not over promotion or under promotion. I think it's going to be about lack of job security. This is going to hit the global economy. All the things that are going on with Ukraine, the cost of living, energy, all of that is going to hit all of us. And we still have the virus around. It hasn't gone. It's still there and might rear its ugly head again. So we have a lot of job insecurity and worries among people. And I think we have to learn how to manage this. I'll give you an example. During the recession of 2007-8 to 2015, that was a long, very bad recession. In fact, we still have a tail of it even now. Next slide, please. The Chartered Management Institute was studying, their economists were studying the job security during the financial crisis. You can see from September 2008, they were looking at all managers throughout the whole of the UK. And they found that you can see the levels as the pandemic, as the recession bit, the job security people declined dramatically. And we get that in and job security is really important because what people do when they're job insecure is they work longer hours, they show more face time, they come into work, stay longer, they do all the things that make them even iller. And so we have to managing people like this means that, again, the line manager has to recognize when people are feeling insecure, has to comfort them, support them, make them feel more secure, give them manageable workloads, realistic deadlines, and all of that. That is quite important. But it just shows you the level of job insecurity. The higher that is, the less productive people are and the more ill they're likely to get. Next slide, please. This is a great cartoon that was in the Buffalo News during the recession. The bad news, this is the boss talking. The bad news, Johnson, is you're being let go. The good news, you're going to have your old job back at half your former pay. I can't live on that, says the employee. The rest of the good news, we're going to offer you a second job, also at half your former pay. Then the bottom, it says, I'd offer you a third job, but I'm afraid of overheating the economy. It's humorous, but it's about job insecurity and how people behave and start showing presenteeism and things like that, which are either no good for productivity or performance, and certainly no good to people's health or the health and well-being of their families. Next slide, please. So, organization structure. What kind of organization are you? Are you an organization that values people, trusts them, or is your culture different? We have to change cultures. That we can no longer treat the health and well-being of employees as a happiness day, you know, and have massages and smoothies and have some fun for a day. That is not well-being, and mindfulness at lunch is not well-being. What it is, well-being is strategic now. We have to change cultures of organizations, and a little bit further down in my talk, I'll tell you how we should be doing that now. Next slide, please. So the last of these slides is about homework balance, life balance, and that's why flexible working is here to stay now. In the UK, most 80–90% of organizations are saying to their employee, where they can, where they don't have to be at the coalface. If you have to be in an office, like you're a doctor or nurse in a hospital, a bus driver, a paste assembly line worker, you have no option. You have to be there in the workplace. For people in service-based industries, think of the call centers in India, right? They can work partly from home. They can do the telephone lines from home. They don't have to all come in a call center, right? We can do more flexible working for service-based industries. This is what people want. It is becoming, the good news is the pandemic has accelerated a trend that people have wanted for last decade, which is, trust me, tell me what I have to do, where I do it and when I do it, we negotiate, but I want more flexibility. I want to work partly from home, partly from a central office. Or I might want to come in all time in the central office. Or I may only want to come in a day or two a week. That's what's happening in all throughout the whole of Europe. North America, it's going on everywhere now, because that's what the pandemic has accelerated. That's the trend that's accelerated. Next slide, please. And therefore, what do we do about all this? Okay. This is a comprehensive program for how do we manage stress and mental well-being in the workplace. This is something I did for the EU, for the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, which is a EU agency. I designed this for them as the way we have to manage it, but I'll go a little bit deeper in a minute. But it basically says all organizations should, number one, have a baseline, some vehicle to allow people who are not coping well to come and talk about their issues. That's employee assistance programs. Counseling services provided to organizations, both private and public sector bodies, for employees to talk online or on a phone or face-to-face about the problems they have and try to sort their problems out. Some of those problems may be home-related, some may be work, some may be a combination of both. Second aspect of this strategy is training people to be a bit more resilient, manage their lifestyle, health and things. That we do all the time anyway, but that's another strand to it. And really important is the primary. In other words, for employers to do well-being audits. Most companies in the UK now do them. Most big public sector bodies do them. And that is using a psychometric tool like ASCET, which is one I designed and published in the literature, where we do an audit of the whole organization filled in by employees confidentially. Then you break it down and you say that part of the organization has a glass ceiling for women, that has an abrasive management style, that bit of it has a long hours culture. Depends what you find. You can break it down demographically by men, women, that department against that department. And you can look and like a diagnosis. Basically what you're doing by doing primary is you're trying to diagnose the organization and find out what the problems are in what part of the organization, and you break it down demographically by every demographic you have. Easy to do, quick to do, very revealing, and help you to develop a strategic approach to your developing a better work-life balance culture, a better culture generally. And it enables you to look at the hotspots, intervene at the hotspots, and to look at the kind of problem issues that you've got. So a strategy you need to do, you need to get employee voice. Employee voice is very important. What do employees perceive about how they're managed, the hours they work, what the communications from senior people, all issues that affect their life. And that is fundamental to building a strategic approach to this, because that's using employee voice to change the organization and change the culture. Next slide. If you do all of this kind of stuff, then the reports are showing the CIP is the professional body of HR professionals. It's made up of 160,000 members in a number of countries in Southeast Asia. It started in the UK and Ireland, the CIPD. It's the accrediting body for HR professionals. Every year they look at a well-being report. In 2018 was the first year well-being initiatives were evaluated. They do it every year, this well-being report. And you could see it had a major impact on morale, lower sickness absence, but still in 2018, 60% of organizations did not treat well-being as a strategic issue. Next slide, please. So it's not only organizations like the CIPD, it is also, next slide, please. It is also the PricewaterhouseCoopers did a study of 55 companies globally. And again, where you do proper interventions and do it strategically and you treat it as well-being as a strategic issue, you get lower sickness absence, lower staff turnover, lower accidents, and so on, even lower productivity, higher productivity. This is the future. And this is what organizations need to do for the future if they're going to want to change the culture and ensure that they retain the millennials and the Z generation. Remember, they're called in the world by employers the snowflakes. They're called snowflakes because they'll shift jobs if they don't get good quality of working life. It's no longer, they're not like their parents who accepted a poor working environment just to pay their mortgage. This is a different generation, whether it's in India or China or the US or UK or France or Germany. It doesn't make any difference. This is what that generation now want. Next slide, please. So basically, this is not what well-being is about. Tomorrow, says the boss, tomorrow is the mandatory meeting on employee health and well-being. The boss says the meeting starts at 6 a.m., so it'll interfere with your sleep and not your work. Doesn't that send a message that work is more important than health, says an employee? I hope so. Healthy employees are unproductive. They're always exercising or eating fruit when they should be working. We prefer employees who work hard and die before their pensions start paying out. Employee, I suddenly feel sick, right on schedule. It may be humorous, but it is not about the well-being day. Now, one more thing I have to mention. The strategy that I outlined, the primary, secondary, tertiary strategy is important. But to make that work, you need voice at the top of the organization, somebody at the top of the organization who holds the organizational accountable. What my National Forum for Health and Wellbeing will produce at the end of June, on the 30th of June, we're launching it in London at BT headquarters, is where we say that every company, every public sector body ought to have a non-executive director who's responsible for employee health and well-being and holds the organizational accountable for poor performance, the way they're managing employee health and well-being. To do that, you also need the metrics. What are the metrics that tell you the organization is not doing well? Number one, obviously, objective measures like higher stress-related sickness absent, higher labor turnover, people leaving your organization, and a whole load of objective measures, poor productivity. But there are subjective measures like, what are the job satisfaction levels in your organization? When we look at one quarter, they drop, to another quarter, they drop 25%. That tells you something's wrong. Then you have to do something. And if you have a non-executive director, that non-executive director can say to the board, we've got a problem here. What the hell's going on? Let's tell the chief executive, we got to do something about this. That applies to, in the UK, the NHS, the National Health Service, has a non-executive director on the board of every single hospital in the UK. And they hold the organization accountable for the health and well-being of all the staff, the nurses, the doctors, all staff, ancillary staff, everybody. That's what we need more of to ensure that we change the culture of the organization. Now, I will conclude by now saying that, so now we've kind of looked at the issues. It's very costly to the productivity of companies, to sickness absence rates, and so on. But it's not a new concept. Listen to this. In 1968, Bobby Kennedy, who was running for president of the United States, he was running for the Democratic nomination to be president of the United States in 1968. 2 weeks before he was assassinated, he gave a lecture at the University of Kansas. His lecture was called Gross National Wellbeing. At that point in time, the United States measured its success on something called Gross National Product, or GDP, the equivalent. Everything we produce, that's how we measure GDP. Everything from, cars to everything, all the services we do gives our GDP measure. Listen to what he said, but his lecture was entitled Gross National Wellbeing. And I'm just going to read a part of what he said. He said, too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product is $800 billion a year. But that gross national product, if we judge the United States of America by that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette manufacturing and ambulances to clear the highways of the carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and for the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwood and the loss of our natural wonder in the chaotic sprawl of our cities. And remember, this was Vietnam time. It counts the production of napalm bombs and counts nuclear warheads, and it still does incidentally, and armored cars for police to fight the riots in our cities. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages or our relationships, or the intelligence of our public debate, or even the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures neither our wisdom or our learning. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. So think about it. Bhutan, the country of Bhutan, measures gross national well-being. New Zealand is moving in that direction now. More and more countries are saying that GDP is not a good indicator of the culture of our society or the success of our society. It's one part of it, the economic part, but what about the social, the people part, the families, everything that a country values and respects? That is what well-being is about. So gross national well-being is, as a construct, a much better measure of the success of a country than just what we produce. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful conference.